When it comes to working on cars, tools are perhaps one of the most important things. However, tools are also a very subjective topic for a lot of people. There's already plenty of videos that talk about the top 10 best tools, top 10 best beginner tools, budget tools, whatever, but I'm not here to tell you about that today. Instead, we're going to talk about the top 10 tools that I've purchased recently and that have been the most useful to me in the last year in particular. Also, along the way, we'll talk about a few tools that were duds or just not worth the money in general, so stay tuned for that at the end. Now, when I was brainstorming this list, I had a lot of ideas for what would be number one, but nothing was nearly as deserving for the top slot as this Milwaukee Ratchet. You don't have to have the Milwaukee one in particular. Lots of brands make these nowadays. In fact, there's an even better long reach version of this. This is my second one of these. I abuse the absolute snot out of this tool. You're not supposed to apply a lot of torque with this, like breaking bolts loose, but I still do anyways, and it's still here. Well, at least the second one is. This is extremely ideal for tight spaces where you don't have enough room to move a ratchet back and forth, or in areas where you're trying to move a nut or bolt that's got corroded threads, or a nylon lock nut, or something that just makes the threads a little bit harder to turn over than normal. It also just speeds up your work in general because it's electric and it moves fast, a lot faster than a normal ratchet. You can just zip bolts out a lot quicker than you could if you were just using a ratchet by hand. But it's still kind of like a hand tool, so it's not quite the same as using an impact gun. And it fits in all the places that an impact gun never would. By far, this has been the most useful tool for years. It's why I bought another one as soon as the first one broke, and it's why I'll probably buy another one as soon as this one breaks. I've had all of these Tecton wrenches for a while. They're ratcheting and they have the flexible head, which is nice. That's why I bought them in the first place. This was my first good set of wrenches, and they served me pretty well. I needed both standard and metric at the time, so they did a lot for me. But, you know, the flex head can be a little tough to work with sometimes, especially if you're trying to use it to break a bolt loose. And then in the scheme of things, these actually aren't that long. This one is 11/16, so it's on the longer side. But for example, this 16mm that you would use for some decently sized bolts in BMW world, it's really not that long, like what, 6, maybe 8 inches long? The edge here isn't super rounded and isn't the most comfortable for gripping with your hand. By comparison, here's the Harbor Freight Icon wrench. It's a lot longer. I specifically bought these wrenches because I knew they were a lot longer and I just needed more leverage under the car in tight spaces when I was working on suspension in particular, but also just any kind of stuck fasteners. I got the idea because I always used to see these at alignment shops. They always had some big wrenches for working on suspension and alignment bolts. They're also just a little bit more rounded around the edge here. It's a little bit more comfortable to really grip it on either end as necessary. Look, even the 10mm is almost as long as a 15mm wrench from my other set. I know Harbor Freight gets a bad rep, but this is the Icon tool line. It's usually a little higher up. It's supposed to kind of compete with Snap-on, I think. Either way, having some rigid, non-flex head, very long wrenches is a very good thing to have, especially for working on old, rusty cars. Now, similarly to getting a good wrench set, I never really had a good ratchet set. I always had the ratchets that came with the socket set, but those were never really designed to be that good of a ratchet unless you bought a really expensive socket set, which I certainly did not. Which is why when I bought this gear wrench set of ratchets, this was a lifesaver. This is my go-to ratchet for everything. It's a pretty solid ratchet. It's got the flex head. It's got 84 teeth, so it's got a lot of good resolution with that ratcheting mechanism. Got a nice long handle for being able to break bolts loose, but also good grip up here for being able to just snug bolts down without over torquing them. This isn't the greatest ratchet in the world. I've had the chance to work with other people's Snap-on tools, and yes, a Snap-on ratchet is better than this, but for the price, I got about 4 of these gear wrench ratchets for a fraction of what it would cost to get a single Snap-on ratchet. And it's held up to a lot of abuse for over a year now. It also came with a little 1/4 inch one and this really small 3/8 inch one that I've never used for anything. And perhaps most importantly is this 1/2 inch one. It's pretty long and pretty heavy duty. For comparison, I have a 1-foot breaker bar and this is actually longer than that. So I end up just using this more than I use my actual breaker bar since I don't have any real breaker bars that are like 2 feet or 3 feet. On a similar note to good ratchets, you want good sockets. Now, I already have plenty of socket sets and a whole bunch of specialized sockets for individual jobs, but these in particular have been the most useful sockets for metric cars, which is pretty much 99% of what I do at this point. Pittsburgh is from Harbor Freight, and these aren't anything too expensive or fancy. Anyone should be able to afford these very easily. All they are is just a set of metric deep sockets, 10 to 19, but I think the color anodized coating actually makes it very useful. At first, I just saw pretty colors and thought, oh, it's a nice rainbow and therefore it'll be pretty cool. In fact, I even saw these in other people's videos and wanted them for myself just because they looked cool. The color coding actually makes a really big difference though. For example, working on my A86, a Toyota, you usually need 10, 12, and 14, which is purple, black, and red. There are numbers nicely printed on the side here, but all I need to look for is the color and I'll be able to grab it instantly without even having to think about it. It's subconscious. Likewise, for working on a BMW, I'll want to grab my purple, which is a 10, and the teal, which is a 13. Also, for working on BMW, I'll probably need my 16 and my 17 and my 18 and my 19. Yeah, BMWs kind of use a lot of different fastener sizes, but you get the point. It's really convenient for just being able to know what you need by looking at it and not having to read the numbers. Really helps speed up the process sometimes, especially when you're in a rush or you're moving back and forth between your tools and the car you're working on. Now, while some jobs can be done without having to lift the car up in the air, most of the time we usually have to get the car raised up in order to get under it to access a lot of things, especially for suspension work or, I don't know, pulling an entire engine. A jack and jack stance was probably one of the first things I bought, but that gets tedious real quick, and that's why these Quickjacks have been invaluable to working out of my garage. Look, my dream mansion has a 10-car garage and multiple bays with 2-post lifts and a 4-post alignment rack and all the fancy things, but until I get a few million subscribers and a whole lot of sponsorship money, that probably isn't gonna happen. So for now, I'm working out of my little garage here and I don't have space for a 2-post lift. MaxJack does make a compact lift that supposedly is semi-portable, but honestly, I wouldn't be able to fit 2 cars in here and that just wouldn't be practical. So I've had to settle for these Quickjacks, but boy oh boy have they been very useful. Jacking up a car and putting it on jack stands over and over again, or even using ramps, gets really repetitive really quickly. At first, I thought these would be a little bit of a burden because they are kind of heavy and they do have to be stored somewhere, but oftentimes that place that they get stored is just underneath one of my 2 cars. It also just helps me get off the ground a little bit more compared to a jack and jack stand, so that extra clearance is really critical, especially when you're doing little things like dropping a transmission or pulling your engine. Look, I don't even remember how many years I've had these, 3, 4, or 5, but they have been invaluable to me for so many jobs on so many cars and have also just made normal maintenance like oil changes and brake jobs a lot easier. Sure, I can get out a jack and jack up one corner at a time and do things that way, but it's so much easier when you can just lift up the whole car quickly and easily and lower it back down just as easily. Would I like a 2-post lift? Yes. Do I have room for that? No. So this will suffice just fine for now. Now, my oil extractor is a tool that you probably never really see on camera, so in order to explain why it's so important, I should probably explain how exactly I use it. Basically, you use this thing to suck oil out of a car through the dipstick tube so that you don't have to get under it and drain the oil through the oil pan. It saves a little bit of effort in terms of getting under the car to do your normal oil changes. But that's not the only reason I have it. You see, I buy pretty much all of my oil through FCP Euro nowadays. And before you skip this, no, FCP Euro is not the sponsor of today's video. That is you, dear viewer, patreon.com/jsoon. You see, FCP Euro has a lifetime return guarantee on all of the products that you buy from them, including consumables. That means that you can actually return oil, brake pads, rotors to them in their used condition, and they will replace it with a new part, only for the cost of you shipping it back to them. If you use the system effectively, you can essentially change your oil almost for free, minus the cost of shipping it back and forth. But in order to get oil neatly back into these canisters, I also use this fluid extractor because it not only extracts fluid, but also dispenses fluid back out through the hose on the top. All of the oil you see in front of me right here is about to be returned to FCP Euro. So if you can imagine how much all this costs, which is at least a few $100, that's all money that I'm going to get back from FCP Euro so that I can buy more oil from them and allow the cycle to continue forever, until the world runs out of oil, I guess. Now, this oil extractor isn't the best. I've had it leak at times. It doesn't really always work perfectly as planned, and in general, I do wish I had something a little bit better or perhaps more automated at times, but generally something is better than nothing, and I would much rather have this than pour oil by hand into all these canisters and try not to spill anything. And that is made a lot easier by having a fluid extractor like this, not only to take the fluid out of the car, but also to put it back in these canisters so that I can ship it back to FCP Euro. Now, every so often, I, like other many human beings, make a mistake, and often that mistake is dropping a bolt in a very hard to get to place. Yes, I know, I drop bolts, roast me in the comments below, but when you make a mistake, it's usually good to have a tool on hand that helps undo that mistake, such as a magnet that extends. I can't tell you how many times this has saved my ass or saved me a lot of time when I'm working in tight engine bays or crowded engine bays where there's not a lot of access, or my flashlight's dead and I can't see what I'm doing anymore. Things like this have made it so much easier to get magnetic objects out of tight areas when you drop them, but when the object isn't magnetic, you need something a little different. That's where this guy comes in. It's a little claw device. You just push in on this end here, and it pushes out that little claw there so that you can grab onto items and hopefully pull them back out to safety. I've only gotten about 2 or 3 solid uses out of this tool, maybe less. These things are real lifesavers when you get caught in a really sticky scenario where you just can't get to an object, but you can just see where it is. Especially when you're dealing with parts right next to the engine and the combustion chamber, you don't want to get things stuck in there. This will fit down the spark plug chamber, by the way, as will all the magnets I have here. Likewise, I've got little mirrors on sticks like this, or if you want to get real fancy, I've got a big mirror on a stick with lights on it. Now, before I talk about the last free tools, I do want to talk about a few things that are inadequate or things that I wish I'd spent money a little bit more smartly on. For example, this impact gun here. Nice, big impact gun, plenty of torque, my first 18-volt tool, by the way. And while I get plenty of use out of this thing, I use it for taking off wheels, it could be a bit better. For one, I didn't buy the brushless version, so that means that sometimes the contacts are a little bit misaligned when you go to press the trigger, nothing happens until you rotate the gun just a little bit, and then it goes. Kind of annoying sometimes, and I kind of wish I had the brushless version. Second, there's really no power settings on this. I mean, there's this little button here that says how much battery is left on it, but there's not really anything to control how much torque is coming out of this. I have a lot of other impact guns and I use them for smaller deals. I don't use this for tiny little fasteners, but nonetheless, it would be nice to have something that had a little bit more adjustability to it. That said, this is the end of the line in terms of how much torque it can provide out of all my tools. If this doesn't work, I don't know what else will. This is a soap bottle. Although I don't use it for soap, I use it for differential fluid because my differential on my track car, which I often change the fluid on, doesn't really have an easy to access port. It's not terrible like some cars could be, but it's definitely not super easy. You can't hold the bottle right next to it sideways. I have tried different fluid pumps over the years. I've bought the kind that are supposed to be able to screw onto the cap, but they never seem to really fit with any of the bottles I have. A while ago, I bought a big syringe looking thing. I don't even know where it is anymore, and it was intended specifically for differential fluid, which is pretty thick and heavy. It never worked. I could never get the syringe to go properly. It was extremely hard to press once you actually filled it up with differential fluid. I don't know, maybe I was using it wrong somehow, but nonetheless, I tried buying cheap solutions off Amazon multiple times, and this has been my tried and true solution. It always works, just very slowly and very tediously. It takes me maybe 20 minutes or more to fill my differential with fluid using this because I have to just pump over and over again to get the fluid in there. Now, my third gripe has less to do with an actual tool that's inadequate, but more with just the overall storage of my tools. In fact, all of our cutting tools in particular are corded and they're stored out here in our workshop, which is a bit of a walk away from the garage. It only takes about a minute to walk out here, but when you're going back and forth between the garage and here, it just makes everything take a little bit longer, and having corded tools means that there's more setup to do instead of just having a cordless tool where you can just pick it up and go for it. We have a whole lot of cutting tools in here, and they're all very useful, but they would be a little bit more useful if they didn't always require setup and cleanup the same way every time. Now, going back to tools that have actually been useful for me, my hydraulic press is a tool that I haven't used very often, but has come in very handy the few times I have needed it. I'll be honest, this thing is bulky, it takes up a lot of space in my garage, and I wish I had a better place to put it. Additionally, this is only an 8 or 10 ton press, and I believe there was one time when that was not sufficient for pressing out an old wheel bearing. But that said, I got it for free, from a friend who got it for free from my machinist, which means that I'm really just kind of borrowing this, but it seems to live here nonetheless. I've used this for pressing wheel bearings, axle bearings, for pressing ball joints out of old knuckles. Again, it's bulky, it takes up space, and I wish I didn't really have it sitting right here. I don't have a better place for it, but I can't pretend that it hasn't been valuable to me because it really has been. This is maybe not one of those things that everyone needs in their garage, but if you have the space for it, or if you find yourself doing bigger and bigger jobs, then maybe consider getting one of these because it will come in handy eventually. Now, I know I'm probably going to have a hard time convincing you that you need an engine stand and an engine hoist in your garage, and maybe you don't, but to be honest, I've gotten a lot of use out of mine. You see, about 7 or 8 years ago, I pulled the first engine out of my 1966 Ford Mustang, and when I was doing that, I asked around to see if there was anyone local who was willing to lend me an engine hoist. Luckily, there's a lot of old white dudes around here that work on old muscle cars, so there was someone. Thank you, Chris. But after that, eventually there came a point where I needed to put the engine back in, and I didn't really want to go back to him. I knew he needed the engine hoist for his own job, so I decided I would go out and buy my own at O'Reilly Auto Parts. I bought a cheap AC Delco cherry picker, and to be honest, it's lasted perfectly fine for over 5 years now. In fact, closer to 7. I don't know how many times I've actually used it to pull an engine at this point because I've swapped things, I've done transplants between one car to another. I've lost track at this point, but it has come in very useful. Likewise, the engine stand is also really nice. The one you see kind of scattered around me right now is actually one I got for free when my college was clearing out their old building. I also think it used to belong to a friend of mine, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the other one that's sitting at my friend's house right now is a red one made by Summit Racing, and it has a hand crank on it, which makes it a lot easier to turn engines over. Now, if you think having 2 engine stands is excessive, it's because it is. But to be honest, when I met my girlfriend for the first time, I was actually building 2 engines at once in my garage. One was for a client and one was for me. So if I had a nickel for every time that I needed 2 engine stands at once, I'd have 1 nickel, which isn't even 2, but it's weird that it happened once. Outside of working on engines, I've actually used this cherry picker to pick up solar batteries that we installed on the side of our house because they delivered the pallets stacked and they're 300 pounds each. There's a lot of weird use cases for a cherry picker, and generally you're not going to need to use it that often, but when you do need it, it is very useful. Okay, I know this isn't quite a car tool, but hear me out. I have 3 suggestions for the last tool that all go together. 3D printer, a caliper, and some CAD software. I have a background in engineering. In fact, I have an engineering degree, and that's why I have a lot of familiarity with these things and why I've been using CAD software for a few years now. But 3D printers and CAD software aren't exclusive to engineers. In fact, they're pretty much a DIY tool for a lot of people that don't know really anything about engineering. But back to cars, this 3D printer, along with the CAD software and a pair of calipers, has allowed me to do a lot of things to help fix cars. Everything from reverse engineering old parts to make new ones, to designing parts that are one-off or custom fits, making brackets like this ECU bracket for my 8.6 ECU. I bought this exact printer a little over a year ago, and I've already gotten a lot of mileage out of it. Bamboo Labs makes a lot of really reliable printers, and you can look them up if you want to know more about them. They're not a sponsor for this video or anything, although I wouldn't mind a sponsorship from Bamboo Labs. But realistically, this is an extremely reliable printer that I've been able to use for so many jobs, both in cars and out of cars. It's so helpful to have something that just makes any object you can draw on a computer. I can't speak highly enough about 3D printing and its uses in DIY and custom projects. I could go on about this forever, but all you need to know is that this, plus some CAD software, plus some calipers or other measuring tools, will do you a lot of good in terms of making your own custom parts for your own projects. So there you have it, all of my most useful tools for 2025. However, if you watched this far, I want to give you one more bonus tool. And this isn't quite a car tool, but this is something really important to me nonetheless, which is a notebook. See, I've tried to write things down a lot of different ways over the years and keep track of information. I've used random sheets of engineering paper to post-it notes to writing things down on a whiteboard, and there's plenty of different organization tips I have on that regard, especially for learning to make content on YouTube. But in general, I have found nothing to be more universally effective than a single notebook. I mean, here's notes for this video. Here's notes for that ECU bracket I made for my 8.6. You can use this for anything. You just have to find what works for you in particular. I went through a few different writing solutions before I got to this one in particular, but now that I found it, I use it all the time, and it makes it a lot easier to keep keep track of things as I'm working on projects or videos. It just makes it a lot easier to organize your own brain and your own information. So if you have a hard time keeping track of things, or if you've got a lot of ideas floating around your head all the time like me, consider getting a notebook of any kind, find what works for you, and maybe it'll increase your productivity. I know it did for me. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support the channel directly, then head down to my Patreon. Link is in the description below. If you like this video, then consider leaving a comment down below and maybe hit subscribe button. It helps me out tremendously. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.